You're listening to The Unsafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown.
Nimrod was working towards political, economic, and religious unity on his terms, not God's terms. And throughout history, that's what man has worked to do. Remember, God showed Nebuchadnezzar 4 empires in a dream? Each empire was trying to do that, to create unity on man's terms, both politically, economically, religiously, militarily.
Anything that people try to do outside of the will and power of God is doomed to fail. There's no government strong enough to hold a country together politically, economically, or religiously. And yet, as Pastor Ken will show us in today's message, that's what people keep trying to do. As we continue through Revelation, we will see the end of all the goals and institutions of man. We will see the end of everything he tried to accomplish outside of God. And then we get to see what God builds in its place. Well, let's join Pastor Ken in the book of Revelation chapter 18 as he continues his message, Why Babylon?
Enki is the Sumerian god of the subterranean waters. His main city was Eridu, and his temple was there. And that's where Sumerian said kingship first came down. In other words, a government or empire. So in this town, Eridu, there is a temple, which is actually the house of the abyss, to Enki. And Enki, another name for him, is the god of the abyss. Archaeology has shown us that all of the stuff that they've found there, the first layer is pre-flood. So it's been there a while. Now, in Sumerian mythology, Enki is one of the creators and organizers of the universe. This is what he says. Now, I'll give you a hint as to who Enki really is. He's Satan, okay? He's lying to these people, but this is what he's got them to think. He has the creation of man ascribed to him, and according to Akkadian tradition, he assumed the role of a trickster. Really? His advice saved gods and humans alike from hopeless situations. He's the one that says, I saved the human race from the total flood. No, he didn't. God did. He is the patron deity of erudition and scholarship on one hand and on purification rituals on the other. And he had a son who's called Marduk, another fallen divine angel. Okay? Marduk, by the way, also became known as Bel, and it was the god of the city of Babylon. So now you're starting to see the tie-in between Eridu and Babel and Babylon and all that. Now, in the Bible, the abyss, or the sea, is a place or origin of chaos. Enki is the god of the sea, or the abyss. He's the god of chaos. At the earliest dates, when they were looking at this history, Enki had switched to being Lord of the earth and of the deep. Who is the prince of the power of the air? The Lord of this earth, the king of this world. It's Satan. They were worshiping Satan. Period. He's the one who's in charge. Isaiah 14 tells us this. How you have fallen from heaven, O star of the morning, son of the dawn. You've been cut down to earth, you who have been weakened, the nations. But you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars. I'll sit on the mount of the assembly in the recesses of the north. I'll ascend above the heights of the clouds. I'll make myself like the Most High. Nevertheless, you'll be thrust down to Sheol, to the recesses of the pit. And in 2 Corinthians 4, we see that he is referred to as the god of this world. He's the prince of power of the air. He's the god of this world. And they were busy worshiping him in Eridu, and there was another god that they came involved too. In fact, Nimrod was personally involved with this other god. So back to Genesis 4. I said we're going to get to Genesis 4. Here we are. Cain went out from the presence of... This is after Cain killed Abel. Cain is not a good guy. Cain is... he's a murderer. Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain had relations with his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Enoch. Not the Enoch that walked with God and then was not. This is a different Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of the city Enoch, after the name of his son. Now to Enoch was born Irad. And Irad became the father, and all these different names that are there, but his name was Irad. Now, as you start tracking through Cain's line, and you start looking at the names and how they all come together, the Enoch of Cain's line, distinct from the Enoch of Genesis 5, which I said was different, he actually has a different, in Sumerian, his name is Uruk. So that's the city. Okay? So if that's the case, then Irad, we look at that, Irad in that language is actually Eridu. So Eridu was founded by Uruk, whose dad is Cain, which means Cain may have actually been involved in the founding of the city of Eridu and the temple that was found there. If that's the case, the city of Eridu was founded by Cain or his descendant, and in that city there was established an altar to the god of the abyss, the god of this world, Satan. That's not good news. Now we know where all of this started to come up from. Of course, I want to point out Marduk. Marduk is involved in this. Once you have the languages separating out, you start seeing new names showing up. You start seeing Marduk. There are other names that show up as well, because there were other fallen angels who were participating with Satan prior to what happened in Genesis 6, prior to what happens in Genesis 10 and 11. But you'll see that Marduk winds up becoming the primary god of Babylon. Now, the Tower of Babel. It's rather sizable. In fact, it's the largest ziggurat in that entire, there's nothing bigger. It's the largest. I mean, this was a large public works project that would take thousands and thousands of people to do. And it was being worked on, and historically, looking at the archaeology of this area, everything stopped suddenly. Just stopped. And then people start showing up in other places. A guy who has a different name, but it sounds a lot like Nimrod, but now it's an Egyptian, he shows up in a place called Egypt. And some of the others show up in different places too. Now, they did rebuild, Saddam Hussein rebuilt the ziggurat at Ur. So we have an idea of what they actually look like. You would have the stairs that would go to the top, and at the top there would be a room, a chamber. And if you want to know the size of the chamber, it's the same size as the bed that would fit the bed that Og, king of Bashan, had. And that would be for the purpose of the king to go and have relations with the god and ensure that they have good crops for the next year. The only problem is that in Eridu or Babel, because of the relationship Nimrod had and because of who he was and what he had turned himself into, and the fact that everybody spoke the same language and we were disobeying God, there was a good chance that they were going to be able to recreate exactly what happened in Genesis 6, which is why God stepped in. Again, here's the rebuilt ziggurat. Thank you, Saddam Hussein. Okay, he's the one that rebuilt that. There is in this, they found a story. It's called Immerkar and the Lord of Arata. But the big thing is in the first section here is that in the Sumerian story from that time period, it says towards the end, the people entrusted to him could address Enlil verily in but a single tongue. It talks about the fact that they have one language. Okay? This story has in it one language, and then it has everybody getting multiple languages in this story. And it all is based in this town that we're looking at, okay? Now, what's going on? Well, in the story it says, and this is Nimrod, who goes by a different name here, talking to Nana or Inanna, who is a goddess, sometimes he's God, depends. He's gender fluid. Basically, they're instructed you need to build an Abzu for a holy mountain, because they believed that they could only communicate with gods. Gods lived only on holy mountains. These false gods, these fallen divine beings, would only communicate with people on mountains. That's because when you stop and you take a look at what happened in Genesis chapter 6, they came down to Mount Hermon. That's why. Well, God meets his people on Mount Zion, and then he moves Mount Zion from the south to Israel. Baal moves his mountain to Zaphon, which is on the border of Syria and Turkey. So, I mean, it's mountains are a big thing in terms of their thinking. So what this all is this section here talks about the fact that you need to build a false mountain in the plains of Shinar. There are no mountains there, by the way. I've been there. There are no mountains. A lot of sand. Scorpions, snakes, got those too, but not a mountain. The people will applaud and admire me. The sun will behold me with benevolence. And the splendor of the sacred sky, the lady who watches over the highland, the divine lady who embellishes herself, Inanna, mistress of all the lands. And then Nimrod's calling himself Enmerkar, the son of the sun. So he's saying he's actually part of the sun god. But as you go further into the story, you find out that the Lord of Eridu changed the tongues in everybody's mouth and gave them all different languages. So you see that Enki gave them all different language rather than God. They're blaming Enki again. And he's the trickster, so he gave everybody different languages. So that's kind of background. But the background of Babylon, the city of the way of life, actually starts back in chapter 4 with Cain. And he founds this city with his son Enoch. It's called Erod or Eridu. And they build a temple to Satan. And they participate in all kinds of strange things that they're not supposed to do, just like Genesis 6. Now, the first altar was constructed based on what we've seen, anywhere around 5400 BC to around 5000 BC, whatever. But you go a couple thousand years forward, and you have Nimrod, who's called Enmerkar, per Sumerian legend, who is involved sexually with a god, Nana, also known as Inanna, the goddess of war and sex. Now, about Inanna, and you'll see why Babylon continues throughout the ages and why there are issues today. Inanna is best known as the daughter of the moon god, who at that time went by Sen, who today goes by Allah. Okay? Same dude, same fallen divine being. These guys all got together. It's a merger. You'll see that there are Tammuz figures. You'll see, and that was one of the problems we saw in the book of Ezekiel. They are worshiping Tammuz in the temple. Tammuz is actually a false god. And all these different things that they're talking about, but the bottom line is Inanna was the goddess of sexual love and was part of a fertility cult. She was the rain goddess, the war goddess, patron of prostitutes, but she also was the spouse and lover of the king. And in the traditions, she was the spouse and the lover of Nimrod. And they participated in a sacred marriage rite once a year at the top of the Abazu. And then she provided blessings and power and victory and war and all that. But one of the things we've also found out about this god, she is polar opposites, or he is polar opposites. I have to say she or he because he is death and life. She can be male, she can be female, or he can be female. Anyway, gender fluid. And when you see this in the sexual promiscuity that's connected with the worship of it and the gender fluidity, and you start saying, well, where did all this stuff come from today? Go back to Eridu and what was going on with Nimrod. And then you start seeing Babel, and the Jews love to play names with word games. It's just real simple. So what you've got is Nimrod, who was or became a giant, was trying to reestablish what happened as a result of Genesis 6 with the descent of the Watchers on Mount Hermon. He was personally involved with fallen divine beings and was trying to reestablish a direct conduit for forbidden knowledge, giants, and everything else that had been a problem prior to the flood. And since everybody spoke the same language, he aggregated them all into his community. He was a hunter of men. He hunted to get them in to do that, to do his bidding. God stopped it in Genesis 11 by coming down and putting an end to the rebellion, dividing the languages, and forcing obedience to his command to fill the earth by creating 70 language groups, and then he established borders. So, okay, here's where you're going to be. You get Japan. You get China. You get Peru. That's basically it. He also assigned members of his divine council to oversee these nations, and they corrupted themselves and they started demanding worship too. So as you study the history of the area, you see all these different gods fighting each other, the countries that they're running fighting each other, until Jesus shows up on the scene, shocks them all by rising from the dead, and then they have to come up with something else. And they did. Now, Ishtar is a Sumerian name for Inanna. Ishtar, who's also called the Queen of Heaven, gee, I wonder where that term gets used, is a paradox. Again, she's a virgin, she's a prostitute, she's order and she's disorder, she's male, she's female, she disrupts family values, she disrupts gender roles, she's sex, she's violence, she's storm, and all of this ties together. And as you start following through history, later you see she's also known as Venus, Aphrodite. Today I think she's called Planned Parenthood, but not real sure. I don't know about that last one. But the spirit is there, okay? This spirit is still around today. Now, Nimrod had tried to reestablish the pre-flood world of Genesis 6. He was involved with these divine beings. And one exhibited gender fluidity. God ended it all. But that fallen divine being exists today and is still playing games today. That's the thing we have to remember. When you see people having problems and discussions and concerns about it, we need to love the folks who are involved in that and share Jesus with them, because Jesus will change their life and will change them. But the spirit that's behind it has been around a while, and this is not new. By the way, each ziggurat that was built was considered to be a channel of communication between the terrestrial people there and the celestial that they were trying to get at. It was a meeting point, and it was looked upon as the center of the universe. So in Genesis 11, 1-9, we see all of this happen, and they get split up. I'll let you read it. I'm not going to go through it. But God changes everything, and they name the town Confusion. Babel is what it is in the Hebrew, because God confounds the language of everybody. Now, that's the beginning, back in Genesis 4, of Babylon. Nimrod was working towards political, economic, and religious unity on his terms, not God's terms. And throughout history, that's what man has worked to do. Remember, God showed Nebuchadnezzar 4 empires in a dream? Each empire was trying to do that, to create unity on man's terms, both politically, economically, religiously, militarily. Man thinks he can be successful in reestablishing what it is that our ancestors gave away in Genesis chapter 3. We can't. It's not possible without God. Only Jesus Christ can do it, and he will do it. I've read the end of this book of Revelation. We win. He reestablishes all of this. But for 3.5 years at this point in the book of Revelation, the unholy Trinity has been trying to create on earth, for the first time ever, this political, economic, religious, military unity that has never really existed worldwide. That's what they're trying to do. And it dates all the way back to man trying to do it with Cain, trying to do it with all these different things, and it never works. But Babylon, the spirit of Babylon, Babel, Eridu, it goes all the way back to Genesis 4. It's rebellion that just doesn't end until God deals with it. Here in chapter 18, we have the beginning of the end of these fallen divine beings, as well as their offspring. Remember, in Genesis 6, where we see the watchers come down and they have these kids they call Nephilim, giants. Well, according to the non-canonical book of Enoch, when those giants died, their spirits couldn't go to heaven, couldn't go to Sheol, they're here on earth as demons. And they are territorial. They hang around where they tend to be. So, and because they're territorial, you start looking at what some of the scripture says here, especially in chapter 18, the first 3 verses, and it starts to make sense as to why that's going to be a prison, especially when we start going into some of the details. Now, this is not a 3.5-year-old city. This is not a 3.5-year-old idea. This is a thousands-year-old idea, and it's being built on the site of a city that didn't get destroyed like the Bible says. It just kind of faded away. And people live there today, by the way. Genesis chapter 3, verses 4 and 5. The serpent said to the woman, "You shall surely not die, for God knows that the day you eat from it, your eyes will be open, and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil." Well, that's what people have been trying to do ever since Cain, trying to be like God. He tried. He even worshiped Satan, apparently. Built a monument to this guy, little 10 by 10 room. But you wonder what else was going on. These are just things that we've been able to find archaeologically. We know the roots go back to Cain and the worship of the god of this earth, Satan. We understand why final judgment of civil Babylon, as well as religious Babylon, is necessary when you see its roots go that far and where they come from. So again, looking at these first 3 verses of Revelation 18. After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority. And the earth was illumined with his glory. And he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great." So now when you see Babylon the Great, you can think that's human society, human culture, everything that people without God have been trying to do since Cain. City building, all of that. Everything connected with it. Fallen man, Babylon the Great. That's what it is. She has become a dwelling place of demons. Well, remember, the kingdom of the Antichrist will celebrate demons, and many of the people working in it will be possessed. When the city is destroyed, where do they go? They stay right where they are. They're territorial. We're going to see that, and we'll talk more about that as we get to it. She has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every unclean spirit, and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality. Yes, at the time of the end, every nation will have, but even today, every nation has. It's called mercantilism, it's called capitalism, it's called communism, it's called whatever you want to call it. It's the city of man. The kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of their sensuality. In other words, they're worshiping money. We've never seen that throughout human history, have we? Where people worship money? No? I think it's a common theme as we start studying.
Today's message was in the book of Revelation. Pastor Ken has been teaching from this prophetic book here on the Unsafe Bible. You hear often about people trying to predict the end of the world or referring to some kind of apocalyptic event. But the truth is, the real apocalypse or revelation of Jesus Christ is something unlike anything else. If you know Jesus, you see these events as something that God will bring about to eventually restore things to how they were meant to be. If you view God as an enemy, you would naturally perceive the events in Revelation as some foreign enemy seeking to wreak havoc on the world and bring it to ruin. So what's the truth? If you're curious about what we believe and what our core foundation is built on, go to theunsafebible.com to learn more. Are you in the Jupiter, Florida area? If so, you're welcome to join us for these types of teachings in person. You'll find ways to contact us on our website, so you can learn when and where we meet each week. You can also access more teachings online by going to theunsafebible.com and looking under the Media tab. Catch up on any messages you've missed, or listen to one you already heard as a refresher. Once again, that's theunsafebible.com. We're so glad you took the time today to hear from God and His Word. Pastor Ken has more to share from the book of Revelation, so don't miss a single edition. In the meantime, continue growing on your own in this very peculiar book of the Bible. And join us again on the Unsafe Bible.